Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Simona Spark, and our mission is to build a future where no one needs to come out anymore. Together, we can create a world where everyone has the right to love, to succeed, to have a family, and to live a full, happy life. Welcome back, everyone. I'm super excited today to introduce you to our guest, Jordan. Welcome, Jordan.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We had the pleasure of hearing about you from your mom the other week, and I'm just very grateful that you accept my invitation to be here today and share your story with us.
Yeah, of course.
So let's start with getting to know you a little bit. How old are you? Are you in school? Are you working? Anything that you want to share?
Yeah, so I'm 22. I've been out as a transgender man since I was 19, at least to my family. I've been out since I was 18 to my friend group. So that's just kind of a little bit of a backstory there. Mm-hmm. I am currently in my senior year of college. I am very ready to graduate. I'm an anthropology student. Indiana University is where my degree is through. I'm going to their feeder college thing in Indianapolis, though, so I'm not actually on the famous Bloomington campus or anything, but my degree is through them. So yeah, and that's kind of the gist about me.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So let's jump right in, and I wanted to take us way back to the times when you realized that the things are not as they appear to be.
Yeah, so it was a lot easier to figure out that something was up once I started getting socialized in middle school or so. And my other friends started experiencing boyfriends and girlfriends and really kind of getting into the whole sexuality bit. Because at least in my experience, what happens a lot with trans people is that they'll get into their sexuality first, unless they're a child. But I wasn't a kid when I came out. So for me, it was I came with sexuality first, and then over time just kind of realized, oh, well, lesbian doesn't really fit because I still like boys, but I'm not comfortable being around boys. So what's happening there? And then it just was this whole just deep dive after, a lot of internet searches and things like that of trying to figure out the right words and things like that. But I think it all kind of started, I started getting curious around 7th or 8th grade, 13. And then I started tying in pieces of my life that were more associated with my guy friends and my girlfriend. So the fact that I wasn't really into makeup, or I didn't like to wear high heels, or all of these different things. I hated having my hair long, and I wore it long for a really long time because when I was really, really young, I got teased for having it short, but I chopped it all off again around 7th grade, and just I never went back.
Right. Good for you. So we'll be safe to say that at that age of 13, living into a binary world and didn't necessarily have role models, transgender role models around you about it, you were trying to decide if you go with the girls or go with the boys.
Yeah. I think for me, it was a lot easier to identify myself with being a butch lesbian, because I didn't even know it was possible to be a different gender for a while. And so, I think it was easier. And the reason I say easier is obviously because, like you said, I didn't have the language and I didn't know anybody who was transgender or things like that. And so when I was going through stuff when I was that age, they didn't really have transgender kids on television or anything in the media for me to look at and be like, oh, that's what I'm experiencing. Right. And to really connect the dots. So it was a lot easier for me to just kind of go, oh, well, I'm just a masculine girl. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because right now in this moment, you sharing your story, actually you are creating a resource for those that are in similar circumstances that you were. So again, thank you so much. This is very powerful. And let's go to the moment that you decided to come out. Who did you come out first?
So the first person that I came out to as anything, as a lesbian, as genderqueer, as transgender, as anything, was my sister. She was the closest to me both by area and like in emotional connection. We're 3 years apart, but like after we both left the house, like we got really incredibly close. And she used to drive me to school and stuff in middle school, and she'd pick me up at high school and things because we went to different high schools. So, and so it was a lot easier for me to come out to her because I knew that no matter what, she would not give any shits.
Great.
Excuse my language, but yeah, like just she would not care, like regardless.
I'm so glad that you have her. So tell us how that first conversation went.
When I came out as trans to her, you know, I think for most of my family, the first question was, what the heck is that? You know, and then once I kind of explained it to her and stuff, like it took me a while to kind of find the words for it. But once I explained it to her, she was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And things like that. And then it just kind of became like well, are you going to tell mom and dad? Like, what's the next step here? Was kind of her immediate response from what I remember.
And how was it for you?
One of the interesting things about coming out, especially as trans, is that you kind of black out for a second when it happens.
Okay.
Because there's so much stuff in the media of like, it's such a very terrifying thing to come out as anything.
Right.
But coming out as trans, there's so much violence still happening to trans people that you kind of like, or at least I do, I black out with anxiety for a minute, and then like I'll come to when they have like a positive reaction and be like, oh, okay, this was positive. So it's kind of difficult for me to remember exactly what people have said in the past.
I see.
Yeah, my mom's reaction was memorable because we've talked about it so much. My dad's reaction was memorable because he's my dad.
Yes, totally understandable. And speaking about your parents, we did hear your mom's experience in that conversation when you came out to her. So I'm curious, what was your experience? The side of the end of the line, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with, I did not know that she was driving until after we talked about it later. She likes to tell people that I like trapped her in it and was like, yeah, I got you. And like, I did not know that she was driving until after the fact, but which like now that we looked at it, I'm like, wow, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, so that was kind of the like preface with it. But for me, it started a couple days before I came out to her. Actually, it was I had to really build myself up to it. Because, you know, she's my mom, and, you know, for any kid, you know, the way that your mom reacts, especially, is, you know, that's like your closest parental relationship for a lot of kids. Because there's like, at least I believe, there's kind of like a biological component there of like, she literally raised you from like fetus. Right. So you're connected in a way that you may not be connected with like a father figure or things like that when you have a mom. But obviously that's not true for everybody. Right. But I know for me it is. So for my mom was like was gonna be the make or break moment kind of deal. So it took me a couple days to really like get up that courage and really talk about it with her. And I actually talked with, like, in the community I was in at the time that I came out to my mom, and that community has like a youth group for kids that are LGBT. The woman that runs it has kind of become like everybody's like fun, crazy aunt. In a way, and she gives really good advice on like how to handle things and stuff like that. And I had talked to her a couple days before and was like, you know, I need to tell my mom about this, and I know that, but I'm also like terrified to do it, and blah, blah, blah. And she gave me a lot of really good wisdom of, you know, it's your story, but if you want her in it, you have to tell her. Like, she can't be a part of something she doesn't know, right?
Right. Valid point.
So, that kind of started it. And then the next day I came to my Greek sorority, which is it's a gender neutral sorority.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But yeah, so I came to them. They have a very tight knit trans group, and I came to them and was like, hey, I want to do this, and was basically like, wish me luck, and
right,
kind of thing, and really hyped myself up for it. And then the day after that is when I told her, and I waited until the evening because I figured, oh, well, if it goes poorly, I can like sleep it off and it'll be fine and things like that. And if it goes well, there's enough day left that we can discuss, but like if it doesn't, then I can just go to bed early or like something. And
sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, it was kind of my thought on it. That was kind of the lead up. And then I told her, and then everything was fine, as you heard.
Yes, and we did hear your mom's part of the story, her experience, and we are curious to learn about your experience in that conversation, if you are willing to share that.
Yeah, of course.
So how was it for you to let out those words when you came out to your mom?
Yeah, so it was freeing but terrifying, because my mom has this like crazy intuition thing about her where she knows when either of her kids have something to tell her, but they're not telling her.
Right.
And I think that's just like, that's a parent thing. But yeah, so I started that conversation and was like trying to be cool about it. When it's like, hey, how are you? Like, what you doing? And she finally just got to a point in the conversation where she was like, Jordan, just spit it out. I don't know what's wrong. Like, and she's like, you're making me nervous. Like, and so like after I told her, I was like, hey, like, I'm transgender was like kind of how I put it, and like didn't give any explanation or anything like that. And she was like, okay, what is that?
Right.
Which for most of the times that I've come out in the past has pretty much been her reaction. It was a pretty consistent reaction of, okay, what is that? And what does that mean for you? Like,
right.
And I just like, I went into like a small explanation. And by the time that I told her, I'd had enough practice explaining it to other people that I had it down to pretty much an art.
Like having your own script.
Exactly, like I had like a little script, yeah.
And kind of be able to educate a little bit the person that you talk with so they understand what that is.
Yeah, exactly. I had like a mind script and went through it and was like, well, for me, it means that I'm actually a boy, but for somebody in a male body, that could mean that they're actually a girl and things like that. And it just like, and kind of opened her world a little bit to it. And she's like, okay. And then it was something along the lines of like, well, like, I love you was kind of what came out. And I was like, well, great. That's good. I'm glad was like kind of the end of that conversation of just like this huge relief of, oh, okay, well, mom's okay with it. So that's one less person to be terrified of.
Wonderful. I'm so glad that you have such a positive experience with your parent. And how long after that you start your hormonal therapy? And how did you make that decision?
Yeah, so that was it was a decision that originally I had made prior to coming out. The reason I was coming out to my mom was because I hadn't yet made that call, but I had pretty much made it up in my mind of, okay, I'm going to go to Chicago and I'm going to go to this one clinic there that does informed consent, which means that I didn't have to have a therapy letter. I could just sign a paper and get on T. It was just going to be a done deal and everything was fine and things like that. But in order for me to do that, I would have to come out to my parents because they're going to notice if I just like my voice randomly starts changing and things like that.
Of course, all the changes that your body will go through.
Yeah, exactly. So what had originally spurred my decision to come out in the first place, and then once it happened, I was like, oh, well, like, never mind. It was, I kind of like sat back and reflected on it a little bit and was like, this is like, what were my original intentions here? And like, that's really fast. And I still have a lot of social transition to do before I'm anywhere near ready to do a medical transition, because if it took me 3 days to work up telling to my mom, I still have to tell my dad and basically the rest of my family and things like that. And it just kind of became this like snowball effect of, okay, well, it took me this long to tell her, I need to wait until it gets easier to tell people. And that was like my personal decision. I know that other people might have not made that decision, and because HRT and really any sort of medical transition for trans people is a very, very personal thing, and they have like their own reasons for it. Those were kind of my reasons for waiting a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then I started May 4th of 2017, I think. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and so I basically waited not like 6 months or so and came out to the family and basically told everybody, you know, well, I'm going to start on HRT soon. This is what this means. This is what the process is. Like, this is the change you can expect, like all this stuff.
At that point, Jordan, when you announced your family and extended family about the treatment that you were about to take and the changes that are about to happen, did you experience any resistance from anyone?
I mean, my mom and dad are really great about filtering any of that kind of thing, especially from like me, but also if there's anything being said about my sister, especially from like adults in my family and stuff, they're pretty good about like filtering it out or correcting a language or things like that before it ever trickles down to us. Mm-hmm. I don't remember off the top of my head any particular instance. I know that there were a couple of people who were like, you know, I don't really understand why this is why this is a necessity for you, and things like that. But that was pretty much the extent of the resistance. And even to a point, my parents had that same resistance of, I'm not really sure why this is a necessity. My dad was really worried it was going to affect my schooling. He wanted me to wait until after I had graduated. And I was like, Dad, I don't do that for 3 years. Right. Right. You know, and so they like everybody was kind of resistant to it at first, but I think after I explained to them, you know, hey, I've been talking about this with my therapist and everybody like medically is on board, and I'm in a mindset where I'm in a really good spot and I have the support system I need where I'm living right now, that this is a really good place for me to start this and start this part of this journey and things like that. And I think once everybody saw how on board I was with it and that pretty much anything they said wasn't going to faze me, they were pretty much on board.
I love it. Wonderful. And how was that process? How did you experience all the changes?
It's a process. So I've been on T for almost 2 years, and my voice still hasn't completely dropped. I'm just now starting to grow hair on my face. There's a lot of different things that like I knew going in were going to be a slow process. And part of it is like kind of frustrating to an extent, but at the same time, like they were all things that I knew were going to be slow, like when I started it. So they were things that I had so many conversations with my doctor and with my therapist and with my friends who were on T. And the thing with hormones, whether you're taking testosterone or estrogen or a mix of the two or whatever, is that they affect everybody differently and like wildly differently. So for example, my best friend, you know, his voice dropped literally 3 days after he started T.
Wow.
You know, his voice dropped literally after the first dose, whereas mine took almost 2 months or so before it started even cracking, which is more average. Right. I'm finding very quickly that my best friend is just kind of weird in the genetic pool. But yeah, I have friends who they've been on T for 2 years or so, and their voice still hasn't dropped at all. You know, and like facial hair is always going to be slow coming. And so there were aspects of it that I wasn't really super excited for, but like I knew they were just going to be side effects. So
like what?
You know, for instance, like everybody that's on T that I know of, you know, they always talk about how you basically turn into a wolf man.
Really?
A little bit of you start growing hair literally everywhere, and it starts growing a lot faster than you're used to, which it does. It super does. And, you know, I wasn't really pumped for it before I started T. And then after it started happening, I realized how excited I actually was for it to happen. And so, when I started getting like facial hair shadows and things like that, like I said, facial hair hasn't started growing in, but the shadow is there, which confuses me. When the shadows and stuff started coming in, like that was a very exciting thing for me, even though I had literally no interest in having facial hair when I first started.
Interesting.
The fat distribution changes were something I expected, but not to the degree that they happened. Like I look a lot fatter than I am because now all of my fat, instead of being in my thighs, is now in my stomach. So, but like on the flip side of that, it's also a lot easier for me to lose weight now, which was a side effect I was not expecting to have.
Wow.
There were a lot of things that my doctor tried to prepare me for that just like you just had to experience them in order to really understand it and understand what was going on. Those were kind of the big changes. The other one that I think my mom actually left out when you guys were talking was the aggression got worse. But that has more to do with the fact that the way that I have ADHD, and so the way that it started changing based on my hormone levels, and which is something that nobody really could have predicted happening. But I started getting aggressive towards the very beginning. It's since petered out, thankfully, but it was just that original spike in hormones. Wow. And like suddenly being a lot stronger than I was used to being.
Really?
Kind of realized it's a lot easier for me to like tighten up a really difficult faucet handle. It's a lot easier for me to like pick up small children. Kind of a mindset check of, okay, if you try to pick up a child with the same amount of force that you used to pick up a child with, you're going to launch it across the room. So maybe not. Wow. And kind of those sorts of things that nobody really could have prepared me for. But when they happened, I was like, oh, okay, that's a surprise.
This is absolutely incredible. It's not only that you're facing all the changes in your mind while stepping into a new identity, but you are facing major changes in your body. So how do you deal with all this?
Yeah, therapy has been my godsend.
Yes.
There are things that I tell my therapist that I would not ever say out loud to anyone else. Definitely, like now that I'm older, especially because when I first started T and when I first started looking into surgery options and things like that, I was really, really frustrated with the standards of care that trans people are put through, where they're allowed to have access to hormones or have access to surgery or things like that. But like, especially now that I'm older and I've been on T for 2 years and I've been looking into surgery more often, it makes a lot of sense that having a therapist, having an established relationship with a therapist prior to starting hormones or having surgery or things like that, why it's so important. Granted, the timeline that they call for either of those things is absolutely ridiculous in my opinion, but I understand the need for the therapy in general.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking about changes and how you face those changes for yourself, how those changes are being received by your immediate family?
I know that everybody that is super close to me has seen a pretty much immediate change of, I'm allowed to dress the way that I want to dress, and I'm allowed to do the things that I want to do and that come naturally to me. And I don't have to worry about society trying to force me as difficultly into a box that is so not right, and so I think having those things noticed and noticing them myself, it's made me into a lot more of a confident and a lot more of an outgoing person.
Right, absolutely.
And I also think that it's kind of put me back into what I was like when I was a kid a little bit. It's anytime I talk to like my mom or any of my extended family members or anything like that, like they always talk about how, like I was really excitable and I was really fun and energetic and confident and was very like, I don't take anyone's crap kind of a kid. And then I became very quiet and very reserved when I hit puberty.
Right.
And then I started testosterone, and suddenly I'm back to the, I'm loud and sometimes obnoxious, and, I make a point to, make sure that everybody knows who I am and what I do. And, there's so many different parts of me. And that's definitely an immediate change that happened. Yeah, I don't want to say like overnight, but, in the first couple weeks of being out, and not even on testosterone, just being out.
Yes, I remember that you referred to that a liberating feeling when you came out. And freedom, and especially freedom to be yourself, is just a boost of confidence. And in this case, we are not talking about coming out as gay or lesbian, that most of the situation you will never know if the person won't tell you. In your case, you used to be a girl and now you're a man. So it's a coming out process at a totally different level.
Yeah, because there's an aspect of coming out that's, well, I'm still me. And it's like, well, when you're trans, like, yeah, you're still you, but to an extent, you're not. You're the you that you want to be. You're oftentimes louder and more excited and, more boisterous, more friendly. And then on top of it, you're still you, but you're not always going to look the way that you started looking. Like your facial features obviously aren't going to change, but for trans men or for non-binary people who are on testosterone, or eventually you're going to get facial hair, and your facial features aren't going to change because bones don't change when you're on hormones. But at the same time, if you've ever seen a guy who goes from having a beard to not having one, it looks like they grew bones in places that weren't there before.
Right. It's an optical illusion, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's that whole aspect of, like you said, optical illusion there that wasn't there before. Getting kind of re-used to who these people were as kids and who they might have never been, depending on when they started kind of feeling like things were off. And
right. I can't even begin to understand the pressure on transgender people. As I'm on a mission here to create a future where no one needs to come out anymore, if you will be my girlfriend 2 years ago and we didn't see each other in 2 years, and now you knock on my door and you are a man, you kind of have to come out to make me believe that you are you.
Yeah, I actually had an experience or so where I visited with my grandpa, and he didn't recognize me.
Wow.
Like at all. Like we finished our visit, and he called my dad later and was like, who is that kid? And my dad was like, that was Jordan. What are you talking about? Like kind of an interesting spot to be in, because at that point, especially, I hadn't thought that I'd changed that much. But it's especially for the family members that don't really get to see you that often. Yeah. It can be a huge difference between visits.
Yes, absolutely. And as we come to a closing here, what will be one thing that you will say to preteens or teens they are going through similar experiences that you went through?
Be patient with adults.
I love that.
It can be really hard sometimes, especially when you're like 13 or 14. It can be hard to not only find the words for yourself, but once you've found those words, it's adults that know you, or even adults that don't, to look at you and go, oh, well, you're too young to understand who you are. Or and that goes for sexuality too, and it's talk to your doctor. Have a private conversation with your doctor where your parents are not in the room, because they will probably know more than you do about the things that you're experiencing, and might be able to give you words.
That's an amazing advice. Thank you, Jordan. And what is it that you will tell to the parents of those children? Kind
of the same, but on the opposite side of the coin of, be patient with your kids, because they're going through this absolutely mind-blowing experience, and it's just as hard for them as it is for you.
More likely even harder.
Yeah, and also don't get frustrated with them if they don't want to answer something, because you might be asking them a question that they either haven't thought about or they have thought about, and it gives them a lot of anxiety. Be patient with your kids and kind of let them come to you about stuff. You're just dying to know the answer to something. There's plenty of support groups, and Google's your friend.
Yes, I love it. Go educate yourself and get support so you could be the parent and support your child instead of putting the pressure on your child with a bunch of questions. Great advice, Jordan. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
It's been a pleasure to have you here, and I really, really appreciate you sharing your experience with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for tuning in to Redefine Family, a Spark Transformation podcast. Feel free to share your story, knowing that your story could change someone's life. We invite you to spread the love by sharing our message with others. And leave your comments at spark@redefinefamily.com. Until next time, remember that you are the spark in your life. Just shine bright.